Coming in at number 10 is Daredevil and the Punisher. These two crime-fighting street-level heroes have been butting heads for a hot minute. As with a lot of pairings on this list, to say that they absolutely despise each other is kinda pushing it. Matt Murdock and Frank Castle respect one another, even if their philosophies to crime fighting are in direct contradiction to one another. Matt is a pretty devout Catholic. He's a lawyer. He believes in the criminal justice system, and he's got a pretty strict no life-taking policy, except for maybe like 3 instances that are pretty easy to justify. And then there's Frank. The criminal justice system not working is the very reason his family were taken from him. He believes the system to be broken and that his method of an eye for an eye, if you're a criminal you don't deserve to live, is ingrained into the whole philosophy of his hero activities. They couldn't be more different in terms of their morals, but running in the same circle and working in such close proximity to one another means that they are almost forced to work together. And because of that, they have eventually learned how to work together, even begrudgingly. And even though one thinks this horned crime fighter is naive, and the other thinks his skull-themed colleague is a perversion of the system he fights for, they still find a way to make it work. Number 9. Green Arrow and Hawkman. The interesting thing about this somewhat surprising rivalry between two sometimes forgotten Justice League members, no offense to either, is that it's political. Other rivalries in comics are predominantly centered around modus operandi or love interests or personality differences, but this is just straight up that Green Arrow is pretty liberal and Hawkman, being either a centuries-old reincarnated warrior prince or a space cop, and sometimes both, is pretty damn conservative. The debates between these two heroes are pretty intense, and they've both been wrong and right in different instances, which makes for very interesting storytelling and dynamics. Oliver Queen has been paired up with a space cop before, talking Hal Jordan Green Lantern, and while they butted heads from time to time during their travels together, Arrow's vocalization of his political views never seemed to bother the Lantern as much as it bothers Hawkman. Green Arrow is the kind of guy to demand Aquaman opens Atlantis to democratic elections, and Hawkman has been dubbed the ultimate conservative. They just do not work. Number 8. Batman and Guy Gardner. I'm gonna be honest here, I think most of us are on Batman's side with this one. Batman has never really gotten along with Green Lanterns. I can't really tell you why because I don't know enough, so if you do know, share with us in the comments. But what I do know is that of all the Green Lanterns, Guy Gardner is known to be just the most unlikable. He's boisterous, cocky, a big old meathead, and he's got a stupid haircut. At first, Batman and Guy's rivalry was a bit of a joke, but then it pretty quickly changed to the point that only one hero was left as a joke. In 1987, we were given the Justice League International that had an awesome team of heroes including Shazam, Black Canary, Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, Martian Manhunter, among others, with Batman as their appointed leader. Most people would agree that Batman is a more than qualified leader for a team like this, but one person who didn't take too kindly to Batman's leadership position and even wanted the role for himself was Mr. Gardner. After going on a big old rant and Batman calling Gardner a mongrel, the Lantern takes off his ring and decides to challenge the Dark Knight to a battle of fisticuffs. One punch later, and the Lantern became the biggest laughingstock of the superhero community. Even Superman finds it funny. Number 7. Spider-Man and Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine doesn't really seem like a matchup you'd ever really expect. The funny thing is, they actually really work well together. Most of the time. It's really funny to see these two work together because you've got one of the most quippy, lighthearted, inspiring, and morally positive heroes teamed up with one of the most grumpy, rageful, animalistic, and brutal heroes in the Marvel landscape. The thing here is that while these two may clash, they're almost like brothers. Think like Wolverine as big brother and Spider-Man as little brother. Spider-Man and his snarky ways has a knack for getting under the skin of Wolverine's short temper. But I mean, we've also got instances of Wolverine hitting on Mary Jane, Spider-Man throwing Wolverine out of an Avengers Tower window, and Wolverine being a little too stabby-stabby with his claws for Peter Parker's no-killing preferences. So they have definitely clashed and butted heads. And oh my god, there is also the Ultimate Universe versions of the characters who swapped bodies, with Wolverine being the most creepy creep ever to Peter's girlfriend. But for the most part, when these two heroes show up together, it's a treat. Number 6. Cable and Deadpool. Similar to Wolverine and Spider-Man, most of the times when Deadpool and Cable team up together, it makes for an entertaining read. Almost for the same reasons as Wolverine and Spider-Man 2, honestly. One smarmy guy who talks a lot, and one grizzled guy who talks very little. always fun. But unlike those two, Deadpool was literally introduced as a villain specifically for Cable. In New Mutants number 98, Deadpool was hired by Tolliver to bring Cable down. The failure of this task put Deadpool on the warpath to try his darndest to bring this incredibly popular 90s hero down. They clashed multiple times, with Deadpool being one of Cable's constantly returning villains. As most people know, the hatred between these two characters didn't last forever, specifically ending when their respective series were cancelled and we were given Cable and Deadpool if looks could kill. Wade gets contracted by the One World Church to steal the facade virus, a new disease that turns everyone blue in order to achieve global equality, with the side effect of people melting. Cable is also fully aware of the virus and has the goal of destroying it, which puts the two heroes head to head. Deadpool eventually gets the upper hand on Cable and gives it to the Church, who turn around and infect both he and Cable with the virus just to test it out. Luckily, using his powers, Cable absorbs Deadpool into him, their genetic structure temporarily bonding. He vomits up Wade's essence, which heals back into his old body. Cable then uses his ship's teleportation matrix, which takes Deadpool along for the ride, and they appear in the same location, graphically bonded together before tearing themselves free of one another. The anti-heroes learn that due to being bonded genetically, Cable's machines recognize them as the same entity. So whenever either of them teleports, the other is along for the ride. So basically, the two are almost forced to eventually get along with each other and have a pretty cool relationship. They're kind of cool.
Number 5. Miss Marvel and Rogue. Back when Miss Marvel was none other than Carol Danvers, of course. These two women had a long-standing rivalry because of how much Rogue really messed Carol up. Rogue not only stole Carol's powers, but also left her comatose, and upon recovery without much of her memories and emotional connections to her memories. At the same time, this wasn't exactly a walk in the park for Rogue either, who also didn't much care for Carol, as Carol's own memories and psyche basically haunted Rogue as a result of their altercation. For a while, these two really did not like and even hated each other. The good news is Carol would actually have nothing to fear from Rogue now, as Rogue has much better control over her powers and doesn't really need to worry much anymore about accidentally draining someone's memories, life force energy, or even accidentally their powers. Number 4. Wolverine and Cyclops. Even more iconic than any other superhero rivalry involving Wolverine is probably the one between him and Cyclops. Now, you could chalk this one up to the fact that Logan is just hot-tempered at times and stubborn, and therefore he just, doesn't often get along well with others. But really, when it comes to these two, it's actually all about the approach to heroism and breaking rules versus playing by them. Which oddly enough doesn't always mean that each person is always advocating for the same principle between those two, but they generally tend to be on opposite sides regardless. For example, if Wolverine is arguing that breaking the rules is the right play, then Slim is usually arguing against that, and vice versa. At the same time, their rivalry is also quite brotherly at times, and at the end of the day, probably a lot like Cap and Iron Man. These two men respect one another, and despite their infighting, often would consider the other a part of their family. Number 3. Batman and Superman. These two are often thought of as being the best of friends, and well, they are. But that doesn't mean that they don't have fights and that they don't have any beef with each other at any point. In fact, in some realities, the differences between them lead the two to become sworn enemies, as opposed to staying the best of friends. The best thing about these two heroes is in fact how different they both are to one another, and perhaps what has made their rivalry and friendship so strong throughout the years and throughout DC's multiverse is that they both see how much they are different from the other. In some cases, they deeply respect and admire the other's differences. In other cases, it actually leads them to try and break their once fellow colleague, unable to reconcile and accept the other's differences or mindset. Number 2. Iron Man and Captain America. This one feels like a feud as old as time. It's at least as old as these characters are. And in fact, while it does have a long history, it's still relevant today. Captain America and Iron Man clashed during the first Civil War, most iconically, but even recently have been seen at odds with one another following the events of AXE Judgment Day. While Captain America was deemed unworthy by the progenitor, Iron Man's Tony Stark was given a thumbs up instead, leaving the pair to bicker over the judgments and what they truly meant, if anything. During Judgment Day, issue number 6, Tony asked Cap after the event, "Are you okay?" with Cap responding, "No, and we shouldn't feel okay. It was a wake-up call. We should all pay attention and act." Tony clarifies, "No, I don't mean that. I meant me passing and you failing. That must be hard for you." Steve pointedly responds by saying, You made the Celestial. It was based on you, and it tried to kill the Earth, and you're taking its opinion as meaning anything? Once again and always, opposite sides. Number 1. Black Panther and Namor. While Iron Man and Captain America may have a more iconic feud in the comics and films, Black Panther and Namor have one that not only is between them, but also extends to their nation. And theirs has actually resulted in all-out war, not just in the superhero community, but in terms of their own countries as well. This feud actually started, as most do in comics, as a misunderstanding. But as a result of that, both of their peoples began to mistakenly attack one another, and Black Panther and Namor basically started to watch out for the other person. Eventually, it got to the point that they can no longer let bygones be bygones and talk it out. In the film Wakanda Forever, we see this feud making its way to the big screen, with tensions rising between Shuri's Black Panther and Namor of the Talokan, as well as, Wakanda and the Talokan. I feel like overall superhero rivalries are something that can be easily leveraged by villains to distract superheroes enough to give them the freedom they need to unleash their devious plots on the world. Number 10. Johnny Storm and the Thing. For almost no reason whatsoever, these two have had a rivalry on and off in the comics. Why? No one really knows. Their fighting and arguing comes in the form of trading insults, with Grimm often threatening to kill Johnny. Jeez. The two prank each other and Johnny berates Grimm, calling him ugly, while Grimm calls Johnny stupid. The two have quite the rivalry. Granted, this most likely comes from a loving place, where they consider one another to be like brothers. But the strangest part is that despite all their fighting and bickering, they seem to have almost no fights between them when Johnny starts dating Grimm's ex, Alicia, while he is away. Strange feud indeed. Number 9. Wolverine and Cyclops. You may be thinking, but everyone understands this rivalry. Wolverine and Cyclops are just polar opposites. No wonder they fight so much. Sure, this is true, but it's not usually their differences that bring the duo to blows. It's their similarities. Namely that they are often both in love with the same woman. While their love for Jean Grey is as old as time, they even at one point fought over Emma Frost, which seems like it's a bit much. It seems like these two honestly just want to fight each other no matter what. Is it possible that they are not even jealous of the affections of the woman they're fighting over, but the affection that the woman receives from the other? Two dudes fighting as much as Summers and Logan makes you really want to know why. And if there is some tension to ship between them, I know I certainly would ship it. There's gotta be some love under all that hate. Number 8. Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost. For a team and family of mutants, the members of the X-Men sure fight a lot. Though Emma Frost was admittedly part of Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants, and longtime enemy to the X-Men, so it is understandable of Kitty Pryde to be hesitant to trust her. But after Emma reformed, she didn't want to continue to not get along with Kitty. She actually was the first to extend the olive branch, offering Kitty a place at her school. Kitty, however, was still holding a grudge and refused. This led to Emma waging all-out war on Shadowcat, which seems kind of intense. I get that the two already had a hard time getting along, but someone not wanting to sign up for your school does not mean that you should all out aim to destroy them. Little overkill there, Emma. Number 7. Batman and the Green Lanterns. This is a long-standing rivalry that kind of makes sense when you consider Batman had to put up with the antics of Guy Gardner trying to steal command of the Justice League from him, and Hal Jordan, mooning him and all sorts of antics. But Batman's rivalry with the Green Lanterns superseded even just these two jerks. Batman even has a beef with John Stewart, one of my favorite Green Lanterns. Why? John Stewart comes at him for all the Green Lantern hate he spews, calling him out as a man who is just threatened by Hal Jordan because Hal isn't afraid of him. Rather than admit that not seeing eye to eye with Hal is maybe a two-way street, Batman just doubles down. He really does not like Green Lanterns telling him how it is. I mean, I get it in terms of Hal and Guy's case, but John? Really? You're gonna let a feud form there too just cause of the other Green Lanterns? Ugh, yipes. Why can't Batman just get along with at least one Green Lantern? Just one. Number 6. Wally West and Kyle Rayner. These two heroes are both ones that adopted mantles. Wally West became the Flash after Barry Allen, and Kyle Rayner replaced Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. The pair consistently mock one another and often try to debase each other, criticizing one another left, right, and center. This feud started as soon as the two pretty much met, and stems from the fact that they simply think the other is just not good enough to replace the former hero who wore the costume previously. Which is interesting because almost everyone else thinks that they both do a good job. Rather than just accept that they are both doing their best and both good in different ways, they choose to bicker and compete at every opportunity they get. Like little kids, these two. Number 5. Zatanna and Catwoman. Oh boy, does Catwoman have reason to have beef with Zatanna. These two ended up in a fight with one another after it was revealed that Catwoman may have only become a full-fledged hero as a result of Zatanna manipulating her mind. Because of this revelation, Catwoman turned on Zatanna, with the two getting into a physical fight. In the end, Selina was rightly pissed at Z after learning this, feeling like she had never in her life been more violated than she was when Zatanna changed her against her will. It also made Catwoman question whether or not she was actually the hero she had become at this point, since she'd obviously had no choice in that matter. What a terrible thing to do to someone. Number 4. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. A feud that feels as old as time, really. Or at least almost as old as Emma Frost's character. Initially, this feud started because Emma was a villain in the comics, being the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. This made her a rival to not just Jean, but also all of the X-Men. Emma was actually introduced around the time of the Dark Phoenix saga too, and was one of those present and involved when Mastermind took Jean and brainwashed her into joining the Hellfire Club as its Black Queen. Of course, this wasn't really Jean, but the Phoenix, who had taken on Jean's likeness, both in personality and in appearance. What really caused these two women to dislike one another though took place when Emma had reformed and become a hero, and that happened mainly as a result of Emma having a psychic affair with Jean's husband, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, during a time when their marriage was strained. Hence the feud. Number 3. Superman and Shazam. One of the most iconic feuds in comics isn't necessarily a real narrative feud. I mean, these two don't typically go after one another to fight needlessly in terms of themselves as characters. They don't really have much of a reason to be jealous of the other or even dislike the other, but they do end up pitted against each other, often in alternate realities, and just because people like to see who would win if they got in a fight. And actually, their feud extends back in history to like the creation of these characters, which were considered rivals in terms of them being with two different publishers at the time in comics. In most cases, because these two are so evenly matched, generally their fights end in either a standstill, a stalemate, or with Superman implied as the victor. While Superman might be weak to Shazam's magic, Shazam is often forced to transform back into Billy by Superman's tactics. So, number 2. X-Men and the Eternals. Though not all X-Men and not all Eternals are involved in this one. This feud is actually what sets up the Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day event. It all goes down because of the reveal to the world that mutants have the power to resurrect themselves, which is happening now in modern comics, essentially meaning that mutants have become immortal beings. Druig, who at the time is Prime Eternal, thinks this makes mutants far too powerful and labels them as deviants, which obviously deviants are the people that the Eternals must always fight against, which apparently isn't that much of a stretch either, because genetic-wise, mutants are similar enough to deviants for the deviants to successfully be able to use the gates on Krakoa. Labeling them as deviants means the Eternals go to war with the mutants, and of course, their premier superhero team, the X-Men. Hence, X-Men and Eternals fighting each other. Number 1. Green Lantern and Batman. At this point, Batman pretty much has beef with, well, almost any Green Lantern you can think of. At least most of the Green Lanterns who are Earth-based, I would say. The most famous feud between Batman and Green Lantern, though, is the one between Bruce and Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is basically the epitome of everything that kinda irks Batman in regards to a fellow hero's attitude. He's brash, bold, grating, and often seen as undisciplined. At least, you know, in comparison to someone as regimented as Batman, I would say. When Guy found himself in the Justice League and under Batman's leadership, the two clashed to the point that Guy actually decided to challenge Batman, hoping to replace the Dark Knight as the new leader of the team. Well, this didn't end very well for Guy, who was knocked out famously in one punch by Batman. Although it should be noted that this was Guy fighting without the power of the Green Lantern, as he egotistically chose to take off his power ring and not fight with it. So yeah, which is pretty Guy Gardner, I gotta say. Number 10. Hulk and Thor. Hulk and Thor recently clashed in Donny Cates' crossover story between their two series, both of which he is currently penning. The story that he wrote with them duking it out is entitled Banner War. However, these two also have a long history of having beef in the comics, albeit pretty playful beef, I'd say. Their feud is similar in nature to that of Hulk's feud with the Thing. The question starting it all being who is really strongest between them. Thor likewise enjoys the challenge of taking on Hulk, and the two are seen as being pretty evenly matched. Though at the end of the day, I would actually still say that Hulk is stronger, as Hulk is known for being being the strongest there is, after all. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button. Number 9. Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern. Martian Manhunter was there when John Stewart's Green Lantern let an entire planet be destroyed as a result of his ego. The two were deployed to the planet in the hopes of saving it, but Green Lantern didn't feel that he actually needed Martian Manhunter's help and restrained him. Unfortunately, this proved to be a mistake, as when John found the bomb on the planet, it and the room that it was contained in was painted entirely yellow, preventing John from using his Green Lantern powers to do anything to destroy or defuse it. Yikes. As a result, the planet was destroyed, with only John and John surviving the explosion, leaving Martian Manhunter grossly disappointed in his colleague Green Lantern and his hubris. Number 8. Captain Marvel and Iron Man. This is a pretty ridiculous one considering how close these two were, but hey, Civil War II happened. It happened and we gotta acknowledge it. We can't ignore that. Carol and Tony used to be the best of friends, with Tony even using the nickname of Care Bear for Carol, a nickname that her BFF Jessica Drew aka Spider-Woman also often uses, so you know that means that they're pretty close. However, this didn't stop them from getting into it when Carol believed the best way to deal with crime was by fighting criminals before they even manifested as such. That was what Civil War II was basically all about. Basically, it was Minority Report. Captain Marvel believed that using the Inhuman Ulysses' visions to prevent crime was the best course of action, whereas Tony, oddly enough the voice of reason here, believed the best way to go about things was actually to wait until an actual crime happened, not trust in, as he saw it, unreliable visions. Enter Civil War II, which ended with Carol as pretty much a straight up unreasonable villain in the eyes of readers who punched Tony into a coma. Number 7. Robin and Robin. When it comes to the Bat family, there are quite a few feuds to be had, unsurprisingly. I mean, hey, it's a big family. Still, I think one of the most dramatic was the one between Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Initially, when these two met, they seemingly got off on the wrong foot, and Tim kinda wanted to try to offer an olive branch. This came in the form of offering to spar with young Damian, with Tim promising to take it easy on him. However, everything quickly went awry when Damian revealed that earlier in the night he'd actually killed a criminal, the Spook, taking his head. The two ended up fighting, and Damian knocks out Robin's Tim Drake, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the Batcave, and donning a version of his costume when he goes to confront his father, letting him know that he is ready to replace Tim as Robin. Batman ends up returning and retrieving Tim, helping to fix up the damage that Damian did to him. Eventually, these two would move past this feud, but for a while there, it was basically life-threatening. Number 6. Daredevil and Punisher. Daredevil and the Punisher are usually seen to be friends and allies, but because of their difference in opinions when it comes to how best to handle superheroic issues, they are sometimes known to be rivals of one another as well. This element of their relationship is especially highlighted in the Netflix Daredevil series, where we are first introduced to this world's live-action representation of the Punisher. Here, Matt Murdock disagrees with Punisher's tactics, believing he should not kill his enemies or people who get in his way of tracking down his true enemies, whereas the Punisher believes the people he kills deserve it. Although both see the other as a hero of sorts, there are times when they look down on one another or condemn them for their methods. In fact, Frank Castle has likely thought before that Daredevil is not harsh enough when it comes to the way that he doles out justice.
Number 5. Cyclops and Wolverine. Wolverine has had quite the luck with the ladies over his incredibly long history, but despite that, he couldn't seem to let one girl go. That girl was Jean Grey. Jean Grey has pretty consistently declined the advances of our short, temperamental Canadian in favor of her boo, Scott Summers, the consistent leader of the X-Men, Cyclops. They just make for a better couple, despite Scott being kinda the worst sometimes. And Wolverine? He just can't stand that fact. He is pretty consistent, even to the point of being problematic with his advances towards Jean despite her constant rejection. And Cyclops is no pushover. He is, or I guess was, a Boy Scout, but he is also a pretty strong-willed leader and not someone who takes behavior like Wolverine's lightly, which has led to many clashes between the two over the years. Pretty immature rivalry over their teammate, which has gotten bloody on way too many occasions and is pretty disrespectful to the third person involved, starts as a basis, but over their history, these two have butted heads over more important things. For example, there was a pretty serious difference of opinions in how the X-Men and the students of the school they are an integral part of should be led, causing the schism story. Or there was the whole X-Men vs Avengers thing, where Wolverine seemed to choose the other heroes over his own mutant family. Number 4. Green Arrow and Arsenal. Oliver Queen and Roy Harper's falling out as one-time partners is a bit of a tragic ordeal, and it's mainly because of Roy's infamous decline into the world of substance abuse. Originally, Roy was Green Arrow's first sidekick, Speedy. He was an orphan that Oliver Queen took in. Oliver basically raised Roy. Roy would also join up with the Teen Titans, and he had a good thing going as a member of the Teen Titans, even dating Donna Troy. But a while later, the Titans disbanded, he broke up with Donna Troy, and Oliver ran into serious financial troubles and basically started neglecting Roy, going off around the country with Green Lantern and Black Canary. This was the trigger that sent him down the path of addiction. Oliver came back from a mission to find Roy red-handed, and instead of supporting or comforting his adoptive son, Oliver disowned him, kicked him out on the streets, and gave him a swift punch to the face. As you can imagine, this led to a lot of resentment between the two, and Roy struck out on his own, struggling all the while with his issues. He would go on to become Arsenal and eventually Red Arrow, with the bad blood between him and his adopted dad being smoothed over eventually, but those problems of his addiction and Green Arrow's knack for abandoning Roy came back with a vengeance. Now I gotta change the subject because it's honestly pretty depressing. Let's move on. Yeah. Number 3, Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Of all the Robins, Tim and Damian have had the most touchy of relationships. It all started when they first met. Tim Drake was the Robin, and Damian, being the son of Batman, decided that apparently the only way to claim what he called his birthright of the Robin mantle was to literally try and take Tim's life, which is a perfect indication of why he was not at all suited to be the Robin. The little psycho. Damian laid an unholy beatdown on Tim with his much more advanced combat skills, almost bringing Tim to the pearly gates. Luckily, he didn't actually achieve this, but it set a tone for the rivalry between these two, especially as they both took on the Robin mantle. As a side note, Tim had to earn Bruce's love. He worked for it, and with his father Jack, he also had to work for that. For Tim, love is something you have to earn and is never unconditional. And this little jumped up spoiled brat comes in here talking about his birthright with Bruce actually giving Damian the love that he didn't really earn. It rubbed Tim the wrong way. Eventually, Damian claimed the Robin title solely for himself, and Tim set off as just Red Robin. They've also repaired their relationship somewhat, but of the members of the Bat family, I think there is always tension between these two. Number 2, Spider-Man and Venom. Now this may seem like a cop-out because, well, it kinda is. Venom was one of Spider-Man's greatest villains, basically the literal antithesis to Spider-Man. Venom had almost an obsession for Spider-Man, like a really dangerous symbiotic ex-girlfriend. Venom almost pined for the connection he lost with Spider-Man. When the rejected alien bonded with Eddie Brock, whose life was arguably ruined by both his own and Spider-Man's actions, the combo made for a deadly villain who hated Spider-Man with almost every fiber of his being. When Venom started to lean into the role of being an anti-hero, the only real reason these two began to leave each other alone was because Venom moved across the whole country to San Francisco. I guess they just needed some space because over time they began to accept each other, becoming reluctant allies at times, especially in the Absolute Carnage story, which finally began to see the relationship heal. Eventually, in the aftermath of the King in Black story, almost seeing each other as brothers. The tension is still in the air to a degree if you ask me, and crazy exes be like that sometimes. Number 1, Emma Frost and Jean Grey. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. They are powerful female heroes amongst teams of predominantly male heroes, and they are not afraid to show just how capable they are. They are so similar and yet so different, which naturally leads to both friendship and rivalry at the same time. Emma Frost is known for being cunning, assertive, and brutally blunt. She's also no stranger to going a little dark. Jean Grey, on the other hand, is known for being more empathetic, gentle, and kind, except when she was Dark Phoenix. When they first met in the Dark Phoenix saga, Emma was literally part of the villainous Hellfire Club that manipulated Jean to become the Dark Phoenix in the first place. It is not a good way to start a working relationship. Then there is the pretty large fact that these two share a big old love triangle with Cyclops. I think it's safe to say that Cyclops prefers Jean. She is the one who is consistently stuck in his heart, but that didn't seem to stop him from basically telepathically cheating on Jean with Emma, and then actually being with Emma when him and Jean broke up and Jean died. But like I said, Jean was always in his heart, which doomed him and Emma from the start. Emma Frost and Jean Grey have continuously argued and battled over a wide array of issues throughout their history, but at the end of the day, these two women are actually friends. Friends that have genuine respect for each other and who have had each other's back. They even teamed up together to save Aurora Monroe, Storm, at one point, which which displayed both their strengths and weaknesses as incredibly similar but starkly different mutants.
Number 10. Scarlet Witch. Okay, so Scarlet Witch might not be as hated as some when it comes to the general public, but she sure has had her share of hate when it comes to the mutant population. In issue number 7 of 2019's X-Men, mutants even expressed their hate as part of a ceremonial rite of passage called the Crucible that involves revisiting her story. Young mutants who have likely only experienced what happened as a story profess their hatred for Wanda and call her Pretender. Pretender, pretend her! I hate her so much. I hate her so much. And I'm like, no, she wasn't meaning to be a pretender. And before this, Rogue was the one who led the charge when it came to the mutant community blaming Scarlet Witch. Rightly, albeit maybe not fairly, for the whole M-Day ordeal and threatening the very existence of mutant kind. Number 9. Thor and the Avengers. During the Fear Itself event, Thor was struggling with his place in the world. He was hated because the events of Siege, while not his fault directly, had not only caused destruction in Asgard, but also in neighboring Earth residing communities. Many of the people living in one of the towns resented the superhero community for causing danger to come to them. We've seen this a lot actually in movies and comics too. Some had their homes destroyed and couldn't even afford to rebuild, choosing to sell and move out rather than stay and wait for the superheroes to attempt to save the day again and help them rebuild. Not all of the town felt this way, but then a coming war between Midgard and Asgard also was approaching, fueling some of the hate from the public in regards to Thor and the Avengers team. Of course, Asgard was only aiming to destroy Earth to prevent the serpent from feasting on all of the humans' fears and becoming even more powerful. But this only added insult to injury, as the serpent, was also already bent on conquering and devouring Earth himself. I mean, Thor recovered, but this was a pretty tough time for the Thunder God and a pretty tough time to be anyone from Asgard or any sort of Norse mythology. In the end, it was really only his self-sacrifice that managed to redeem him, cause he died. But then he was okay. You know how it goes. Number 8. Silk. Silk is Cindy Moon. She has similar powers to Peter Parker's Spider-Man, including a built-in danger sense, but she can actually also produce her own organic webbing, which I think actually is really cool. Hers is probably the least gross, I think. She even sometimes uses the skill to spin herself a disposable silk suit spider costume. After her and Peter dated or hooked up for a bit, she ended up settling back into her own life and searching for her family. She had been locked up in a bunker for years, long story. Anyways, like Peter much later on, she also got some of the J. Jonah Jameson treatment when it came to her superhero persona of Silk. Though even Jameson himself very much liked Cindy for a time in volume 1 of her series when she was working for him. Number 7. Green Lantern. When comics made the choice to turn Hal Jordan into Parallax and had him basically threaten the entire DC universe, they also created a world of hate for him, with some readers but mostly within the comic book world, and especially in the realms of the superhero community. Even today, more than 20 years later, people still bring this up in the comics. People are not over it. They're like, remember that time you pretty much almost killed everybody? He's like, geez, guy can't get over that stuff. Number 6. Spider-Man. He's a menace! At least that's what JJ would have us think. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people in New York read the Daily Bugle and trust what it has to say. So when they do stories about Spider-Man being a criminal, a murderer, a dang menace, people are inclined to believe those words, which has led to a lot of problems for Spider-Man. And let's not forget the amount of times people have tried to frame him. Right from the beginning, Chameleon himself tried that ploy, and we've seen it happen a few more times in the comics as well. He's just so frameable, Spider-Man, isn't he? Number 5. Bishop and Gambit. This duo have also butt heads ever since they first met. Bishop comes from a future where the X-Men have perished after being betrayed by one of their own, and mutants were put into concentration camps. I said that like I didn't know I wrote it, but I just felt like it sounded harsh. He met a man called the Witness who refused to give his name and claimed to know the story of the X-Men, saying that he was the last one to see them alive. He also went by LeBeau, and it was his similarity to Gambit that instantly made Bishop hate and not trust him. While I understand Bishop's reaction, he just continued to not trust Gambit for pretty much forever. Even when the two are forced to work together, he continued to insult and berate Gambit, often putting both of them at risk due to ignoring Gambit's suggestions while on missions, just because they came from him. I also really don't think that the Witness was the traitor. This is a silly grudge because it is based on so many assumptions. Number 4. Reed and Namor. Cyclops and Wolverine may be fighting over Jean, but it is this fight over a paramour that really takes the cake. Oftentimes when I bring up Namor, Namor, I put him in either category, villain or superhero. In truth, he's really an anti-hero, but he has a few times been an interesting nemesis to the Fantastic Four, or at the very least, Reed Richards. Namor is head over heels in love with Susan Storm, which has put the two at odds, with Richards often presented as Sue's savior, and Namor the awful brute from the sea, who is coming to carry her away. But not always. Sometimes Susan seems to actually want to be with Namor, and with a neglectful husband like Reed Richards, I can't really say that I blame her. Namor and Susan have shared a few kisses and long romantic looks, but in the end she always comes back to Reed. Number 3. Superman and the Flash. For some reason, Superman has this crazy obsession with beating the Flash at his own thing, being fast. Well, you may think I'm exaggerating here. I mean, there have been a few times where Superman actually just wanted to catch Flash because he was being mind controlled, or, was going to run to his death, or needed some sense talked into him. I can guarantee you that there are many, many panels and instances that point to the fact that Superman just really wants to be faster. He has also had countless foot races with countless Flashes, and almost every time he's either tied or lost, with more losses than ties. Yet even though they have been racing since the 60s, in 2011, Superman is chasing Barry Allen's Flash in Superman issue 709, and is still seen wondering to himself in a panel, which of them is faster? Give it up, Superman, it's not you. Quit trying to take this one thing away from the Flash. You have a million other things you're superior at. Jeez. Number 2. Hawkeye and Winter Soldier. Are you surprised by this one? I know I am. Hawkeye and Winter Soldier have something in common, beyond both being superheroes. Super, in Hawkeye's case. They are both exes of Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow. The two are pulled together in the Tales of Suspense, Hawkeye and the Winter Soldier series to track down whoever is killing Natasha's old enemies, following Black Widow's death. It is clear from the way they interact they do not want to be working together, that they do not trust each other, and that they actually hate each other. While I get it that trying to get along with your ex's ex is probably pretty weird, what I do not get is that they later reveal that they have kind of always hated one another. Which means this feud predates their time dating Natasha? What? But why? So this rivalry is kind of based around them sharing an ex, but also just based around, I guess, them both existing. Number 1. Wolverine and Deadpool. These two have a long-standing rivalry for almost no reason. They often fight just to fight. At one point in the comics, Deadpool fights Wolverine because a doctor prescribed him to fight a superhero to help fix his hallucinations. Another brutal fight they have ends with Wolverine offering to buy Deadpool a beer. Mostly, these two fight just because they can. They both have insane regeneration factors, which means they can usually take the fight as far as they want and make it as violent as they desire, and still both be fine. It is a really strange relationship. Of course, Deadpool does take it far enough to kill Wolverine when he brings a carbon-atium sword to take him on when he kills the entire Marvelverse. But don't worry, that death is not part of the main continuity. Wolverine is fine. Beyond this, there is also the hilarious rivalry that translated weirdly to the X-Men Wolverine Origins film, and beyond that, the Deadpool movies, where Deadpool just enjoys poking fun at Logan. I suspect the two might actually secretly be BFFs.
Number 10. Batman and Green Lanterns. I don't know about you guys, but I have always sort of loved how Batman and various different Green Lanterns just kind of never get along. Actually, he has this weird thing against Green Arrow as well. I'm thinking maybe Bruce just hates the color green in general. No, it usually has more to do with the attitudes and personalities of the individuals themselves. So, for example, Batman and Guy Gardner had a pretty obvious disdain for each other when they were both part of Justice League International, and it eventually led to Batman straight up punching the lights out of Guy Gardner. Now, to be fair, no one likes Guy Gardner, he's just kind of the worst. Even the rest of the Justice League International were like, yeah, that guy needs to shut up. And they all left for their mission after Batman knocked him out, just leaving him laying there on the floor. There was also the time Hal Jordan came back to life after the little parallax thing happened, and Batman did not trust this guy one bit. Batman kept getting in the way of Hal, who was trying to actually go and defeat Parallax properly. In this case, it was Hal who did the punching, and Batman kinda deserved it, but he still got his comeuppance for that one. Also, when the Justice League came together for the first time in the newer continuities, I think after New 52, Batman was just like a little sneaky prankster to Hal and stole the power ring off him just to be like, I'm better than you. It's kind of hilarious. Batman has also scolded Green Lantern Simon Baz for carrying a blam blam, and he's had shouting matches and beat the snot out of Green Arrow for speaking up against Batman. It's a bit of a lighter rivalry, but I swear he's got something against the color green. I think it's a fact. Number 9. Aquaman and Black Manta. While Aquaman has two major villains with Ocean Master and Black Manta, the latter of the two just goes the extra sadistic step with this villainy. Black Manta is a man who will go into and come out of retirement based on whether Aquaman is around or not, and the rivalry has just gotten more and more personal for them both over the years. In fact, it kind of rivals all other rivalries, but it is Aquaman, and as much as we all love Jason Momoa, Aquaman, it just ain't that cool, man. He just ain't that cool. He has been, I don't deny it, and the Aquaman stans are going to come at me for this one, but if you like him, let me know in the comments and give me 3 reasons why that don't stem from the fact that everybody hates on him. But back to the point, Aquaman was convinced that Black Manta was responsible for the passing of Aquaman's dad. And he very well might have been, but Arthur's quest for vengeance on that one brought about the accidental end of Manta's dad, so of course Manta needed his revenge, and so he pitted Aquaman against Aqualad by trapping Arthur's wee bab in a bubble of air, causing it to suffocate if the Aqua allies didn't duke it out. And even though they totally did duke it out, it didn't stop anything. And then, even later on, Aquaman even took on Manta's son as a protege, which is like a huge insult to the villain who is arguably your #1 rival. That part was actually kind of cool. I'll give Aquaman that one. That one thing that you did was kind of cool. Also when you had the hook for your arm, that was cool too. Number 8. Black Lightning and Tobias Whale. Black Lightning simply does not get enough love, but his comics and even the show are actually pretty cool. His main rival, Tobias Whale, was the leader of the gang called the 100, and Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, decided that he was going to become pretty outspoken against this group, which prompted Whale to take out one of Pierce's students. This is what created Black Lightning in the first place, but it wasn't the only beef the two shared. Pretty much like Aquaman, Whale had a large hand in the passing of Pierce's dad. After a while, the rivalry would actually travel over to Gotham City, where Tobias decided to try and establish himself there, and he and his gang were a bit too much for Black Lightning, who had to call on Superman for help, which I also think is kind of lame. He could have definitely handled it on his own. But I mean, where Black Lightning called on Superman, there was a time that Tobias called on a demonic entity, so I mean, tit for tat, I guess. If you haven't already, be sure to drop a like on this video if you like it. Your support really helps us out. Also, we have another video that goes over some of Marvel's biggest rivalries as well, so definitely check that out. But in at number 7 is Deathstroke and the Teen Titans. If you have watched the animated Teen Titans series, then you know their #1 most persistent villain is Deathstroke Slade Wilson. His cunning, intense, immoral way of completing his missions have made him incredibly hard to bring down, even compared to other massive threats the Titans face. But over time, guess what? Yes, that's right, it became hella personal. Deathstroke's son, Ravager, had his life ruined after Starfire crashed into his apartment, and then Ravager and Deathstroke fought the Titans together until Ravager passed away in his own dad's arms, which then compounded Deathstroke's hate for the Titans since he blamed them for it. And then we have the massive can of worms known as the Judas Contract. Here, the Titans welcome a new member onto the team who ends up being Rose Wilson, the daughter of Slade. She goes and betrays the team and takes up the Ravager moniker after her brother, and that also ended not very well. It's just a whole whack of hate composed in one person. Deathstroke. I'm talking about Deathstroke. Number 6, Superman and Brainiac. Finally, a rivalry that isn't predominantly fueled by personal tragedy. No, in this instance, the rivalry is just so good because it brings out a whole other side of the Man of Steel, his intelligent side. Whenever Superman goes up against Brainiac, his incredible strength begins to fall at the wayside. Brainiac has even beaten the Man of Steel a few times, and what's interesting is that Brainiac is actually the one here who has made a bunch of personal blows on the Man of Steel. Usually it's a bit more fair with heroes also making a few mistakes, but because Superman is DC's golden boy, we can't have him messing up too much now, can we? Or, if he does, it had better be in an alternate storyline.
Brainiac shrank Kandor and Krypton and carried them around as part of his collection.
Another time Brainiac had Superman distracted, which opened the door for him to get at Jonathan Kent. Superman has teamed up with General Zod against Brainiac. It goes that far sometimes, but my absolute favorite Brainiac moment is probably one of his kind of smaller ones. It's actually in Superman Red Sun, but I'll let you check that out for yourself because I'm moving on.
Number 5. Deadpool. While moviegoing audiences may love Deadpool, not everybody does. Not only is he considered a major menace within the superhero community who no one really wants to team up with, sadly, but his disregard for human life and his violent nature also make him feared by your average civilians in the comic book world as well. Number 4. Booster Gold. Although he does for a time end up achieving celebrity status, Booster Gold is still probably one of the least liked superheroes across the board in the DC universe, likely because his heroics all appear to be for the fame. This doesn't of course stop him from becoming famous, but once people find out that he's kind of a sham with stolen future tech and yet a man from the future with really no relevant information to share with those in the past, many of the public often seem to be finding themselves rolling their eyes at him as much as the superhero community does. So really no one likes Booster Gold, poor dude. Number 3. Batman. Now I know what you're thinking, wait, but everybody loves Batman. I would offer that more people fear him than love the Bat, and while he may be remarked as a hero by civilians in Gotham, this isn't always the case. In Christopher Nolan's Batman universe, Batman even had to go into hiding at the end of Dark Knight after choosing to take the fall for murders attached to Harvey Dent's descent into madness and transformation into Two-Face. Even though Commissioner Gordon knew Batman was innocent, he was forced to pretend to pursue him and publicly label Batman a criminal and a murderer. Batman himself understood the importance of maintaining the faith people had in Dent and in the system. To protect Gotham from devolving into chaos like the Joker wanted, the system and those who operated within it needed to be viewed as the real heroes at this time. And in many alternate universes, not everyone who has played the role of Batman has acted as heroically as the main continuity Bruce Wayne has. In the Tales from the Dark Multiverse series, we get to see a world where Azrael stayed as Batman and turned Gotham into an ironclad, fascist-ruled dystopian nightmare. And in this reality, even when Bruce does get the title back, his views and approach appear to be just as bleak and horrifying. It's like, oh, actually maybe now Bruce is worse. Bruce got messed up! Yo, that whole series is messed up. If you guys want to read something messed up, go read it. Number 2. X-Men. Or rather, really, just all of mutant kind, even. Any superhero that is a mutant is automatically hated. Just for being a mutant. Why? Because racism. Although mutants were originally created from a writing standpoint to get rid of the nuisance of an origin story, explaining away any need for one with the simple phrase, they're a mutant, people quickly started drawing parallels between mutants and the civil rights movement, which was really heating up at the time. Although it's hard to pin down the exact starting date, a big moment for the civil rights movement first happened in 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus in Montgomery. The first issue of Uncanny X-Men was released in 1963, 8 years later, and people's minds started to unite the two causes, making the fictional mutants the parallel for all the real-world races that had experienced racism. And people's minds started to unite the two causes, making the fictional mutants the parallel for all real-world minorities that had experienced racism. As such, the mutants themselves have to face a bigger world of hate in the comics since their introduction, fighting the good fight for mutant rights. They likely have had actually more hate groups than one could even count. I don't even know how many hate groups they had. I know it's a lot. I could definitely list at least 10 of them. Number 1. Watchmen. In the series Watchmen, superheroes are constantly criticized. Originally, the supers actually had to agree to disband due to the public's opinions of their existence. Ozymandias' whole plan is to put supers back on top, creating a situation where they can be seen as saving the day, and in saving the world, after kind of terrifying it, bringing everyone together to create a time of peace. Part of his plan is even to make Dr. Manhattan hated by everyone to get him out of his way, which worked. That worked pretty well. Also, Dr. Manhattan is just kind of like humanity, what is that? But even Adrian Veidt's brilliant master plan doesn't end up panning out when Rorschach's journals are published, revealing that Ozymandias was the one responsible for the alien squid attack on New York. As a result, supers become even more hated and Adrian Veidt is forced to go into hiding. So really the Watchmen universe, just no one likes the Watchmen. I mean, I like The Watchmen, but I don't count.
Number 10. Spider-Man and the Human Torch. In one of his earliest adventures, Spider-Man broke into the Baxter Building in an attempt to impress the Fantastic Four, in hopes of being invited to join the team. This led to a misunderstanding and a conflict between Spider-Man and the team. Although this encounter left both sides with a bad taste in their mouths, it was Peter and Johnny who had the most tension between them due to Johnny's need to be seen as tough and manly, and Peter being reminded of the popular kids who used to pick on him, like Flash Thompson. The Fantastic Four eventually came around to the webbed wall crawler, and Spidey and the Torch became close friends, even referring to each other as brothers. But a friendly rivalry remained between the two. This is perhaps best memorialized in Amazing Spider-Man number 657, when we got a glimpse of a camping trip taken by the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. The two began an elaborate and ever-escalating prank war, with some highlights being Human Torch heating up a bowl of water to try and get a sleeping Spider-Man to wet himself, Spider-Man covering the toilet paper with webbing, Johnny using sunscreen and his powers to write the words "Flame on" Spidey's back, and Peter creating a fake shark fin out of webbing to scare the Human Torch when he was swimming. The two put a pause to their prank war in order to team up to play an elaborate trick on the Thing, so while the two heroes have nothing but love and respect for each other, their friendly rivalry seems to bring nothing but joy to each of them, which is a nice change from all the other entries on this list who seem to genuinely hate each other.
Do Andrew and I have a friendly rivalry, or do we have a rivalry where we hate each other?
I hate you.
I only have the utmost respect for Andrew, so we'll have to resolve this at another time. Also, a quick reminder, if you like this video, you should do the things that people do when they like stuff, like click like or subscribe. Number 9. Moonstone and Miss Marvel. Speaking of rivalries where people hate each other, I also know a lot of people might not know who Moonstone is, and might say, Amanda, there are bigger rivalries than this one that you could be covering right now. And hey, I hear you. But while this list is about biggest rivalries, I also like to keep things fresh by touching on characters and relationships in lists like this that we don't often get to talk about. One, because it helps me to stay sane by not telling you about the same stuff on repeat because, you know, been here for a while, guys. And 2, it's just fun to learn new things. I love learning new things, and I hope you do too. So for those of you who don't know, Moonstone was a member of the Thunderbolts and is Carla Sofin. From day one, she was pretty much a straight up villain. Even when she was a psychiatrist before she got her powers, she was a pretty mean and awful psychiatrist, to be honest. At one point, she becomes the Dark Avengers version of Miss Marvel, standing in for Carol Danvers, who refused to join up with Norman Osborn's team, understandably, and who at the time was known as Miss Marvel. This was before Carol took up the mantle of her former mentor, Marvel, and became Captain Marvel. As a result, the two ended up becoming adversaries, and after Carol dies and is resurrected, Carla fights her for the title of Miss Marvel. She kinda loses this fight, but in a weird twist, she also finds herself again during it, becoming Moonstone once more, with Carol also becoming whole again as a result. Also, for those who are wondering, this is who Carol was fighting in the thumbnail / the cover photo, if you would prefer, for our part 1 to this list, which you should definitely check out if you haven't done that already.
I don't actually hate Amanda. I just hate that she's clearly more popular than me.
What?
Number 8. North Star and Guardian. I know, I have an Alpha Flight problem, just deal with it. Compared to other Marvel teams like the Avengers or certainly the X-Men, Canada's super team, Alpha Flight, has been relatively free from interpersonal conflict. Part of this is because of how the team is divided up across the country and rarely actually have to team up with everyone, and partly because Canadians are so polite that rivalries are much harder to spot. However, two teammates who have never gotten along are Jean-Paul Beaubier and James MacDonald Hudson. Hudson thinks of Jean-Paul as an arrogant, petulant jerk, and Jean-Paul thinks of Hudson as a manipulative government stooge. Both characters have relatively valid points, and as someone who wants Quebec to be its own separate nation, it makes sense that North Star would have an issue with the guy dressed in the Canadian flag. But what is the source of this rivalry? Before the formation of Alpha Flight, North Star believed himself to be an only child, but when Hudson began searching Canada for potential members of his super team, he discovered both North Star and his long-lost twin sister, Jean-Marie. He introduced the two and made both of them members of Alpha Flight, giving them the opportunity to get to know each other while serving as team members. You'd think that would make North Star relatively grateful, but when they discovered that Jean-Marie was actually mentally unstable, suffering from dissociative identity disorder, North Star wanted her removed from the team for her own well-being. She refused to leave, and Hudson allowed her to stay, making North Star believe that Hudson was taking advantage of her poor mental health to keep a powerful team member around. The two have had a rocky relationship ever since, with North Star openly insulting Guardian in the field, and Guardian mostly brushing it off unless it begins to interfere with the mission. Despite their issues, they are capable of supporting each other from time to time, with Northstar reluctantly attending James's funeral the first time he died, and James showing up in uniform to Northstar's wedding in Astonishing X-Men number 51.
I'm the Human Torch and you're Spider-Man, and you're mine.
I can live with that.
Oh my gosh. Also guys, show Andrew that he's also popular and give him love in the comments. Number 7. Madam Mask and Hawkeye. No, not that Hawkeye. This Hawkeye. Madam Mask has beef with a few heroes and some kind of weird romances too, but that's for another list. Like her relationship with Iron Man, which is a love affair, but then it can also be adversarial too, since, you know, she's a villain. Anyways, with Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, these two developed beef after Kate attempted to help out Clint Barton's Hawkeye while he was trying to retrieve a tape from a black market auction that showed him assassinating a dictator. Don't worry though, Clint didn't really do this. The tape was actually a fake to help protect the true identity of the agent who completed the mission on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Black Ops team. Kate ended up impersonating Madam Mask at the auction, wearing her mask and her clothes after incapacitating her, something Madam Mask would not easily forget and would actually swear revenge on her for, hence their rivalry.
At least we can all agree that Adam's the worst of us, right? Number 6. Hulk and the Red Hulk. When Bruce Banner transformed into the Hulk in his first appearance, he stumbled across Betty Ross. The sight of the Hulk caused Betty to faint, and her father, Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, vowed to destroy the monster. This has led to one of the longest rivalries in Marvel history, as Ross has used his position as a general to hunt Banner across the world, hoping to either capture or kill him. The fact that Banner managed to defeat other threats such as the Abomination led Ross to eventually develop a grudging respect for him, but the hate never really died down, not even once Bruce married Ross's daughter, making the man his son-in-law. They came to terms briefly, but once Betty was killed, the rivalry fired up again. The rivalry reached new heights when Ross teamed up with villains such as MODOK and the Leader to transform himself into the Red Hulk. After years of stewing hatred, Ross was able to actively fight the Hulk and even defeat him in their first encounter. The Hulk of course eventually bounced back and took out Ross. Ross has bounced around with his allegiances, having been everything from a villain to an Avenger, but whatever side he is on, he never turns down an opportunity to make life difficult for Banner or the Hulk.
Then Adam is the thing, and then we can both prank Adam together. Adam, if you're watching this video, watch out, but you're probably not, so haha, we're gonna get you!
To number 5. Flash and Eobard Thawne. Things are definitely real when you will travel through time to not only fight your rival, but then travel through time again to change their entire reality. What's really weird here is that Eobard Thawne was actually a huge fan of the Flash, but being from the future, and because time just be like that sometimes, he surprisingly learned that the Flash's greatest villain, Reverse Flash, was Eobard Thawne himself, and then he made sure that this came to pass, kind of like a weird manifest destiny thing. He got powers similar to the Flash, went back in time, and worked alongside Wally West, pretending to be the Flash himself, Barry Allen. Thawne claims responsibility for taking down the Flash family. He destroyed Wally West's life, and probably the most pivotal Flash story, Flashpoint, involved Thawne and Barry battling through time, with Barry attempting to stop Thawne from taking the life of Nora Allen, Barry's mom, which caused a whole different reality to form, and Thawne observed the whole thing, mocking Barry pretty much the whole time. Eobard Thawne found out he was supposed to be a villain, and so he decided he was going to go extremely hard with that and be the most dastardly devil you ever did see. Number 4. Sinestro and Hal Jordan. Sinestro has a serious case of the jealousy. Throughout, Sinestro was considered to be the absolute best of the best that the Green Lantern Corps had to offer, and he was proud of that fact. He even trained the unlikely Hal Jordan to become a Green Lantern, but then Hal went and became the greatest Green Lantern, and that inspired no kindness from little old Sinestro. Nuh-uh-uh. Sinestro hated Hal to a degree. There was also this whole thing of opposing morals. Sinestro held a point that fear and deadly force were the best ways to improve not only the world but the universe, and Hal helped Sinestro's own planet turn against him. And then Sinestro was kicked out of the Green Lantern Corps. Instead, he literally forged the Yellow Power Ring and created the Yellow Lantern Corps itself, aka the Sinestro Corps. They have had some pretty damn intense battles, and Sinestro was pretty instrumental in that whole little parallax thing that we've talked about before. Now, I don't know about you guys, but Sinestro is also incredibly good at being a huge jerk to Hal, but all while being incredibly entertaining to read. Like, I'm definitely a fan of Sinestro over Hal Jordan, and I'm not afraid to say that. Number 3, Shazam and Black Adam. If you think about it, the feud between these two magic powerhouses is probably the longest in the Earth's history. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. And the fun part here is that while Black Adam has done some truly horrible and villainous things, he's not really considered to be as much of a villain as some of the other villains who are on this list. He has still massacred an entire country for no reason, but yeah, definitely an anti-hero, for sure. Black Adam fights for the oppressed and is a champion for his people, but he will use any means necessary to do that. When he became the champion of the wizard Shazam, Black Adam's methods caused the wizard to trap the champion in an amulet. Now it took centuries for the wizard to choose a new champion, and that was Billy Batson. This didn't happen though until a man would betray and end the lives of Billy's parents so that he could reawaken Black Adam. So now, the wizard's old violent champion and his new heroic one are on Earth at the same time, and Black Adam ain't too happy about that, going to incredibly sadistic lengths to try and stop Billy, who is one of the few characters that can actually oppose and stop Black Adam at all. And he has on multiple occasions, just growing the hatred between the two of them. Coming in at number 2, Superman and Lex Luthor. Let's be honest, with only 2 spots left on this list, most people knew what was coming here. While Brainiac is an incredibly great villain for Superman, challenging the Man of Steel with his intelligence more than even this incredibly intelligent Lex Luthor can, Lex has a burning, unsated hatred for Superman, vast amounts of wealth, and an understanding of people's base instincts that allow him to top pretty much everyone else in Superman's rogues gallery. What's interesting is that he didn't start that way. He didn't hate Superman so intensely at first, but after years and years and years of having his plans specifically thwarted by Superman himself, he really just became the #1 thing that infuriated Lex beyond belief. The story, How Much Can One Man Hate, is actually a really good display of why Luthor absolutely abhors Kal-El. The story showed that Luthor's hatred for Superman was kind of born out of the praise and admiration that the Kryptonian received without ever needing to work really that hard for it. Of course, Lex orchestrated the events that took place in the Death of Superman story, with Lex taking down his arch-nemesis. Additionally, All-Star Superman saw their rivalry come to an end, with Superman being taken off the board yet again by Lex Luthor's schemes. Lex himself is probably one of the best villains in comic book history, but I think a lot of us would have a hard time saying that when we know about the villain of the #1 spot. And in #1, yeah, you probably guessed it, it's Batman and the Joker. These two are almost complete polar opposites. One stands for order, the other for chaos. One uses fear as a weapon against injustice, while the other turns laughter into the scariest thing you can possibly imagine. Batman is fueled by an idea, and the Joker has, well, basically no motivation at all, or that motivation changes depending on how he feels. Batman vows to preserve life while beating criminals to a pulp and leaving them in hospital beds, while the Joker almost always just leaves people without the ability to take another breath. This all started way back in 1951 when DC first introduced the Joker in The Man Behind the Red Hood. Before even becoming the Clown Prince of Crime, this unnamed man was on the run from Batman and leapt into a vat of acid, creating the Joker in the first place. So, honestly, Batman himself kinda created the Joker, like indirectly. There are some truly pivotal epic stories in DC Comics that involve this rivalry. The Killing Joke, The White Knight, The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Endgame, A Death in the Family, Death of the Family, Joker's 5-Way Revenge, 3 Jokers, Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. All of them are highly recommended and show this rivalry at its peak. Alright, coming in at number 10 is Captain Marvel and Rogue. A lot of people may not even know about this one, because I definitely did not until a couple of months ago. The mutant Rogue first started out as a villain in Marvel Comics. That part I did know. She was part of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and one of their first attacks on the Avengers involved ambushing a recently returned Carol Danvers. Rogue, who was still learning to use her abilities at the time, accidentally fully absorbed both Danvers' memories and her powers. The attack completely drained Carol of her powers and erased her mind, and then, just to add insult to injury, Rogue immediately decided to chuck Carol off the Golden Gate Bridge. Luckily, Spider-Woman was there and able to rescue her, and Professor Xavier was able to restore Carol's memories, but it wasn't complete. The actual emotional connection to those memories, as well as to her family and friends, was completely gone. Carol remembered things, but it was more like watching a show about her life instead instead of actually living it. Carol regained her powers eventually, but Carol's life was destroyed by a scared young woman who then had to deal with the consequences of her actions and the harm it caused to both of them. Number 9. Professor X and Magneto. These two are like the perfect definition of frenemies. While they have massive respect for each other and almost view each other as brothers, their ideologies are just in complete contrast, and it has put them on opposite ends of the battlefield more often than not. Now, before you jump on me in the comments, I know Magneto is basically a hero now in recent years, and the two of them became allies more than enemies. That's why they're all the way up here at number 9, but to deny the fact that they were one of the biggest rivalries in Marvel Comics, it's just plain wrong. They basically fight for the same thing, the betterment of mutant kind. But while Xavier believes they should try to work with humans, Magneto believes mutants to be the future of the world and the dominant species. They are both right and they are both wrong, and they both have huge respect and love for one another. It's such a great dynamic. If you're enjoying this list so far, be sure to drop a like to let us know that this is the kind of content you want to see. Number 8. Venom and Carnage. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the motivations for symbiotes seem to be very simple. Obviously, their motivations are fueled by their hosts, but without the host, a symbiote seems to just be a very primal being. So, when Venom's offspring bonded with a complete psychopath in Cletus Cassidy, the desire to end lives and cause destruction seemed to be almost double for them both. But for Venom and Eddie Brock, while they started out as straight up villains, Eddie and the other hosts have instilled this sort of odd desire to do good in Venom, in his own weird way. Venom can be bad, but he is good enough to know that Carnage is really bad. And Venom would even put aside his hatred for Spider-Man to fight Carnage alongside the web slinger the first time they ever came to blows. And that's a pretty serious thing for Venom. Carnage has been Venom's #1 enemy ever since. Number 7. Daredevil and Bullseye. I've said before that I think Bullseye is one of the more ruthless villains in Marvel Comics. He's just not a nice guy, and the evidence for that statement can be found in his history with Daredevil. While the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, could also stand as Daredevil's biggest rival, it was never personal between the two of them. But for Bullseye, their rivalry became more and more personal, especially in Daredevil number 161, when we learned that Bullseye had become completely obsessed with his defeats to Daredevil, even hurting others like Black Widow just to get at Matt Murdock. But then, he just lost it when the Man Without Fear defeated him yet again. He now started to see strangers on the street as Daredevil and would send them to the afterlife. He's absolutely nuts, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say the rivalry became more personal for Daredevil as well, especially after 2 separate occasions where Bullseye had ended the lives of Matt Murdock's biggest love interests in Elektra and Karen Page. Number 6. Sentry and the Void. Let's try a different approach to this. What about a character whose own rival is himself? Or an aspect of himself? Honestly, with the sheer level of power possessed by the Sentry, it almost makes sense for his main rival to be his darkest aspect, the Void. When Robert Reynolds injected himself with an experimental golden Sentry serum, an offshoot and supposed improvement of the Super Soldier Serum, he gained the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns and became one of the world's greatest superheroes. Until the Void arrived. The Void nearly took out Sentry's sidekick, Scout, it drove the Hulk into a rampage, and took the lives of over 1,000,000 people in Manhattan. When Reynolds realized this was his own dark persona, he enlisted Doctor Strange and Reed Richards, and together they wiped the memory of Sentry from everyone in the world, including themselves. Let me know a character who you think could be a better rival for the Sentry, other than the Hulk, down below.
Number 5. Storm and Emma Frost. A lot of people obsess over the rivalry over Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, that exists between Jean Grey and Emma Frost in the comics, but this rivalry between Emma and Aurora runs honestly even deeper. It comes from a time when Emma was still a villain, the White Queen of the Hellfire Club, and ended up body swapping with Storm. Needless to say, Storm was not very happy with the White Queen and held a grudge against her for years thereafter, the whole body swap incident. Body swapping is so creepy in stories, like that is a total violation of someone's privacy in like a whole other way. Talk about evil. I mean, I guess unless you are like consensually swapping bodies with someone, then it's just kind of weird with the potential, I suppose, to even be cool. Even in the Jean Grey and Emma Emma Frost's giant-sized comic that came out only a few years ago, it was shown that Storm still thinks of Emma as her rival, even though they are both now technically allies and both sit on Krakoa's quiet council.
Number 4. Daredevil and the Punisher. When it comes to the good guys of the Marvel Universe, there's somewhat of a spectrum of morality, with most of them falling somewhere in the middle. While a lot of characters like, say, Iron Man aren't kill crazy, they also aren't above taking the lives of their enemies if it comes down to it. On opposite ends of the spectrum, you have Daredevil and the Punisher. While Daredevil is strictly against murder and will avoid it at all costs, only resorting to it when under mind control or when he has literally no other choice, like when he killed the helicopter pilot who was using a minigun to turn Hell's Kitchen into a war zone and killing several people a minute in Daredevil number 233. On the other end of the spectrum is Frank Castle, otherwise known as the Punisher, who goes out of his way to murder as many criminals as possible, believing that people are incapable of changing. This difference of methodology, of course, has caused the two to come to blows several times over the years, as Daredevil tries to stop crimes and put criminals away with the legal system, while Frank has no faith in the system and usually tries to kill every criminal he comes across. The two are known to try and convince one another that their way is better, sometimes in very extreme ways, such as in Punisher Volume 5 Number 3, where Frank chained Daredevil to a roof with a gun taped to his hand, telling him that he must shoot him in order to prevent him from killing a criminal. This rivalry has spawned some of the best moments in each of the characters' history, as well as a mini-series called Daredevil vs. Punisher, which is of course completely devoted to this rivalry.
Number 3. She-Hulk and Titania. She-Hulk and Titania have a very interesting relationship in the comics, and while they may be on more friendly terms now in regards to Titania moving away from being a true criminal, as so many Marvel villains have done in recent years, these two ladies are still rivals. In fact, they even came together to kind of celebrate the love of their rivalry in a friendly manner by creating, in essence, a fight club for others to get together and blow off steam. Although initially Jen did suggest that it's just kind of a fight club between them two exclusively. Titania and She-Hulk make for excellent rivals because they are both fierce, determined characters who are well known for their strength and indomitability. In fact, they have a lot in common. And when they fight one another, because they are both so tough, neither has to really worry about actually hurting the other, as they are fairly evenly matched. Also, you know their rivalry is iconic when it's used as the opener for a She-Hulk series, which it was recently in the 2022 She-Hulk comic by Rainbow Rowell. And if you aren't reading this comic, by the way, you need to be, trust me.
Number 2. The Thing and the Hulk. Although many would say that the Hulk is the strongest one there is, Ben Grimm might disagree. These two super strong heroes have gone toe-to-toe several times over the years, starting their conflict over 60 years ago in Fantastic Four number 25. Their fights are always an event fans look forward to, with no clear and consistent winner ever really being named. In their first conflict, Ben was able to come out on top, likely because of his ability to keep a cool, clear head throughout the fight. In their next fight, in Incredible Hulk number 122, Hulk had to fight the entire Fantastic Four, but managed to hold his own before eventually being taken down. Their next one-on-one bout in Fantastic Four number 112 ended with the Hulk landing a devastating and almost lethal right hook on the Thing, giving him his first victory. They fought again in Fantastic Four number 167, but Ben began transforming back into his human form, giving Hulk a massive advantage. Their next fight in Fantastic Four 320 ended in a victory for the Thing, but Hulk was in his Grey Hulk form, thereby being half as strong as his usual green self. Grey Hulk had a rematch with the Thing in Incredible Hulk 350, which went more his way. They've had a couple more bouts since then, with the Hulk usually coming out on top, but despite this, the two have become friends, bonding over their experience as normal men transformed into something more. In issue 49 of The Immortal Hulk, we got to see how, despite everything, Ben will prioritize their friendship over their conflict when he took the time to comfort a Hulk who had just been attacked by the Avengers and make sure that he was okay before helping the Green Goliath in his quest to defeat the One Below All and the Leader. Despite this, it is likely only a matter of time before we see these two come to blows once again in the Marvel Universe.
Number 1. Wolverine and Cyclops. It's a rivalry as old as time. Well, not as old as time actually, but as old as Wolverine's first appearance almost. Wolverine and Cyclops have been known to butt heads almost since Wolverine first joined the team. Shortly after Wolverine joined up with the X-Men, Cyclops seemed to struggle with Wolverine's more aggressive nature, causing conflict between the two. And soon after joining, Wolverine developed feelings for Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl, Scott's girlfriend, which also complicated the two superheroes' relationship and feelings towards one another. While they have always been rivals though, Scott and Logan are also like brothers. They've been through hell together as fellow X-Men, and while they may not always agree, they definitely also are more often willing to work together to help innocents and their fellow mutants. And that is a matter they do at least always agree on, that of helping those who need it. At the end of the day, they're both superheroes, and while they may fight from time to time, they will inevitably end up working back together as teammates, friends, and basically mutant brothers. Number 10. Batman and Green Lantern. Guy isn't the only person who has a problem with Batman, and vice versa. Many Green Lanterns seem to rub the Dark Knight the wrong way. I think it's because he doesn't trust the amount of power they are given, and perhaps the process in which, they're chosen. Batman has also been shown to have disagreements with Hal Jordan's Green Lantern in the past, and demonstrate a lack of trust in him, despite his accolades. Although, I guess with Hal's track record, that's kind of fair. In the world of Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, Batman even straight up attacks Hal when he criticizes Batman, exploiting his, at the time, weakness to the color yellow. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love big superhero rivalries, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Deadpool and Wolverine. Another classic feud is one between Deadpool and Wolverine. I love this one. This pretty much has to do with Wolverine being one of the most serious guys around, and Wade being pretty much a complete goof all the time, who sometimes also just happens to be not very good at what he does. Whereas by contrast, Wolverine is very good at what he does. Although what both of these two anti-hero-ish characters often do isn't very nice. Deadpool and Wolverine have been forced to team up on a few occasions, and it's always fun to watch them do so because, they're both so different. And yet in some ways, they're also kind of similar, even though I feel like Wolverine would not admit that. Last time I saw them team up in the comics was in X-Force, where Deadpool ended up mainly acting as comic relief, despite his intentions to prove himself to the rest of the team and prove that he deserved his place among them. Number 8. Human Torch and the Thing. Talk about some brotherly love and also some brotherly chaos. This is exactly what Human Torch aka Johnny Storm and the Thing aka Ben Grimm of the Fantastic Four have going on. These two love to fight and compete with one another and pull pranks whenever they can get away with it. But at the end of the day, their rivalry is really all fun and laughs. For the most part, it seems they enjoy pushing one another's buttons because they know each other so well and love each other so much. And obviously if you know someone really well and you love them really well, you're probably pretty good at pushing their buttons when you want to. It's maybe the cutest and most earnest kind of sibling superhero rivalry on this list, despite the fact that yes, Johnny and Ben aren't blood-related siblings. Being part of the Fantastic Four though does mean being part of a family. Number 7. Spider-Man and Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine have an even deeper rivalry, probably because they have even less in common, it would seem, on the outside than even the bizarre duo of Logan and Wade. Logan and Wade actually at least have some shared experience in acting as mercenaries and both having their heads scrambled by people, and they've both been known to behave like anti-heroes, whereas Spider-Man and Wolverine are almost kinda on two opposite sides when it comes to their approach to heroics. The one thing they seem to share though, I will say, is that their heart is definitely both in the right place. But just like Daredevil and Punisher, and even more so perhaps, these two struggle to see eye to eye when it comes to their approach and ideology in regards to how best to be a superhero and their heroic tactics. Number 6. Hulk and Bruce Banner. These two were really at odds recently in Donny Cates' Hulk series, and their history has been a tumultuous one, with sometimes the Hulk or Bruce being painted as the villain and the other being painted as the hero. However, in reality, both Bruce Banner and the Hulk have acted as heroes before, and also acted as villains, and they've also even worked together before. In Immortal Hulk, they seem to find some sense of balance and harmony, but this didn't end up lasting too long, as Bruce then turns on the Hulk personas within himself, imprisoning the Hulk to use him as an engine for his space adventures. Odds are good, no matter how many times these two end up making peace with one another, that they will eventually always return to butting heads at some point.
Okay, number 5. Wolverine and Sabretooth. Where Xavier and Magneto are frenemies, these two are essentially mortal enemies, and they take it to an insanely violent level. Honestly, I feel like a lot of this is just because of Sabretooth. Logan seems like he just wants to live a peaceful life, and Sabretooth just comes out of nowhere, multiple times, to ruin that. It's almost frustrating, but they wouldn't be the same if their rivalry did not exist. They actually started out as friends in the beginning, and then, on orders from another bad guy, Sabretooth brought Logan's girlfriend to an end on Logan's birthday. Then, ever since, this became a tradition, as every single year on Logan's birthday, Victor would hunt him down and fight Logan until he was basically at the pearly gates, just to prove he was better. And these guys have lived for hundreds of years, so imagine that every year on your birthday. That would suck. Number 4. Thor and Loki. Thanks to the MCU making Loki so damn likable, this rivalry became a bit more suppressed in recent years, but this rivalry goes back before pretty much anything else. These guys are literally gods and have been around for essentially thousands of years. It all began with childhood pranks as Thor was exceedingly proud and Loki is the trickster god, but Loki's schemes would become more and more intense and endangering as they grew up. Loki trying to bring Thor into trouble and battle by manipulating the Hulk is the whole reason Thor joined up with the Avengers and the team was formed in the first place. There is also the fact that Loki would be the cause of Ragnarok, the fated apocalyptic event that brings the end of Asgard. You can't really find a rivalry that's outlasted this one, as it is quite literally myth and legend. Number 3. Reed Richards and Dr. Doom. Nothing like a good old college rivalry to keep you sharp and on your toes. If Victor Von Doom and Reed Richards, two of the smartest men in Marvel Comics, had teamed up together or tried to encourage one another, the world would probably be a utopia. Unfortunately, Dr. Doom is one arrogant guy and he is much more theoretical, famous for using magic and mysticism alongside his genius, whereas Reed is incredibly practical. Reed also seems to not respect boundaries, as in college he read his rival's research on trying to save his own mother and then proceeded to tell Doom all the ways it wouldn't work. Doom's arrogance led him to dismiss Reed, and then it turned out Reed was right, which led directly to the scarring of Doom's face. This was before they had even become their super selves. Their rivalry comes almost entirely down to the fact that Doom will never admit that Reed is smarter than him. Doom is petty, but we love him for it. Number 2. Captain America and Red Skull. What's interesting about this one is that there probably wouldn't even be a Captain America without the Red Skull's existence. If it weren't for Johann Schmidt's activities on the Axis side of power during Marvel's World War II, then the plan for a super soldier serum to combat him may not have even appeared. Stopping the Red Skull was one of Steve Rogers' first assignments, and his whole Captain America persona was created in stark contrast to the Red Skull, who had become an icon for his side of the war. As such, the rivalry between these two characters is one of the longest running ones in Marvel's history, other than Thor and Loki. Even after Captain America was frozen on ice for decades and came back to the world, Skull found a way to follow him. The Skull even finds ways to come back from the afterlife just to keep on fighting Captain America. And in at number 1, Peter Parker and the Green Goblin. The answer to who Spider-Man's main rival isn't really clear-cut as someone like Captain America or Thor. It's usually a bit of a tie between Dr. Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn. But if we are being honest with each other here, the personal connections and personal attacks that belong to Green Goblin have absolutely made a bigger splash in Peter's life, both personally and as a hero. Gobby orchestrated the Clone Saga, one of the most infamous Spider-Man stories that saw the hero completely doubt who he was. And he did it all from the shadows after taking the life of Gwen Stacy and coming back from his own demise. He returned from the afterlife and his main goal was to still mess with Spider-Man. Doc Ock has succeeded in actually defeating Spider-Man, but Norman makes his life as miserable as he can because he can strike at Peter personally. Today, Norman has made a change to become a hero as the Gold Goblin, but in the very first issue, you get the vibe that that won't actually last.